When you think of a rocket, you mostly think of it going to the place we call space. But how do they actually get there in the first place? And what even is space anyway? In our last video, we discussed a brief history of rockets, starting in 1926 with the first liquid-fueled rocket, and ending in present day, where our space technology has gone further than we could have ever imagined. In that video, I discussed many rockets that achieved certain milestones in space, but did not exactly talk about how they got there. In this video, we will be discussing how rockets can fly beyond the sky and into the endless depths of space. Let's begin. Before we get into how rockets go to space, we first need to understand what even space is in the first place. Space is what we call a vacuum, an endless void of nothingness. Space is the place in which everything exists and is located. This is what we call the universe. What lies beyond? Well, no one really knows. But what's the point where the Earth becomes space? We are no longer in the sky, but in the vacuum of space. The atmosphere is essentially the sky surrounding Earth, a massive dome that captures in sunlight and makes life possible on this planet in the first place. However, the atmosphere doesn't just abruptly end. It gets thinner and thinner as you go higher and higher. However, there is a mostly agreed upon point where the atmosphere ends and becomes space. This is called the Kármán line, and it sits 100 kilometers above sea level. This is where things like air resistance become almost non-existent. But how do we actually get up there in the first place? I mean, the Kármán line is 100 kilometers above sea level. That's about 330,000 feet. For reference, your average airliner has a cruising altitude of 33 to 42,000 feet. So yes, getting to space is harder than you may think. Alright, now we just have to figure out how to get our rocket from the launch pad up into space. In order to get to space, we need to be going fast for a long period of time. We need to gather velocity. Velocity essentially means how fast you are going. There are many ways to measure velocity. Here's a few examples: kilometers an hour, miles an hour, meters a second, and kilometers a second. The speed of a land vehicle such as a car is usually measured in kilometers an hour or miles an hour, depending on where you live in the world. The speed or velocity of a plane is measured in knots or nautical miles per hour. Since rockets travel much faster than either of these machines, we measure their velocity in per second instead of per hour. The most common measurements are meters a second and kilometers a second. However, you can't just shoot a rocket out of a cannon and expect it to reach the moon, or even just space. It is launched with lots of momentum, but will quickly slow down as the Earth's massive gravity pulls it down towards the surface. It is made even harder as the air in the atmosphere fights against you and slows you down even more. If we want to get our rocket to space, we need a large amount of speed for a long period of time, so that we are constantly getting momentum upwards. For this, our engines must be continuously supplied with fuel, and lots of it. The amount of fuel said rocket has is measured in what we call delta V. For example, if my rocket was travelling at 400 meters a second and I had 1,400 meters a second of delta V left in my fuel tank, by the time I'd ran out of fuel, I would be travelling at 1,800 meters a second, or maybe slightly less due to atmospheric effects. We also need to consider how powerful our engine is. We need our engine to be more powerful than the Earth's gravity and the weight of our rocket in order to go up. I talk more about this concept in episode 2, how rockets work. So, now we are ready to launch, let's talk about how we can actually get to space. The first thing we should do is ignite the engines and ascend straight up. If you have watched or seen rocket launches before, however, you may notice that they gradually tilt over to the side as they climb. But why do they actually do this? If we go straight up, we can indeed reach space, but not go very far in space. In order to even reach an Earth orbit, you need to be travelling at a very fast speed horizontally while in space. Technically, if you did continue straight up into space, you could go fast enough to escape the Earth's gravity completely. However, not only would this require a massive amount of fuel and be very inefficient, but it would also throw your rocket out into deep space to never see the Earth again. This is not a very useful way for getting anywhere. But why even bother orbiting the Earth anyway? Well, if you are circling the Earth, you can adjust and pinpoint a trajectory to any location, as you can wait for the perfect time to accelerate. As we said before, to get to an Earth orbit, you have to be travelling very fast horizontally while in space, so as the Earth's gravity continues to pull on you, you instead circle around it instead of falling down to the ground. So our goal is to go really fast horizontally. So why bother launching upward and turning slowly, wasting time and fuel when we could just launch sideways? Let's test it. In this spaceflight simulation software, Kerbal Space Program, I've built a rocket and will try to launch it sideways instead of up. When we launch, I immediately turn to the side and start gaining speed. However, this doesn't last very long. As I previously mentioned, the Earth's atmosphere starts extremely thick and gets thinner and thinner as you go up. This is why it is sometimes harder to breathe when you climb a high mountain. There is less air at that height. This is also why it gets colder the higher and higher you go, as there is less air trapping in heat from the sun. Since our rocket is at such a thick part of the atmosphere, there is too much air for it to reach higher speeds. Since our rocket doesn't have as many control surfaces such as wings which planes have, our rocket is very unstable in the lower atmosphere. We waste a lot of fuel trying to fight the air in the lower atmosphere, so we could never reach space, let alone the velocity needed to be orbital. This is why rockets launch upwards so that they can get out of the thickest, nastiest parts of the atmosphere as quick as possible. As they ascend and the air in the atmosphere becomes more scarce, the rocket will slowly start tilting to build up horizontal velocity. Once the rocket is past the Kármán line and in space, it will be completely horizontal, burning sideways to reach orbit and travel further in space. This is most commonly referred to as a gravity turn. So this is great, now we know how to get to space. Now we'll just briefly touch on some of the concepts of spaceflight. This marker here is called an apoapsis. It shows the highest point I will reach if I do not change my speed at all. For example, when you throw a ball, it ascends and then reaches a point where it starts going down again. That point is the highest point it reaches, or its apoapsis. When I'm not going fast enough to reach an orbit and I'm on a trajectory to eventually fall back down to the Earth or another celestial body, that is called a suborbital trajectory. A ballistic trajectory, however, is a trajectory that cannot be influenced or changed by the craft itself, but by only natural forces such as gravity. For example, if a bomb was dropped from an aircraft and could not be controlled, it would be on what we call a ballistic trajectory. Now, we have talked about a lot of things in this video, so let's do a quick summary. Space is a vacuum and is the home of everything in existence. This is mostly called the universe. Space begins at no particular point. This is because the Earth's atmosphere gets thinner and thinner the higher you go. However, atmospheric forces are almost non-existent 100 kilometers above sea level. This is called the Kármán line, and it is where space begins. Delta V is how we measure how much fuel a rocket has. It measures how much in which the rocket can speed up. Rockets don't go straight up as they need to travel horizontally to reach orbit. Rockets don't launch sideways because there is too much air and the atmosphere is too thick for them to go fast enough to reach orbit. Rockets slowly tilt towards the side as they climb because the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner. This is called a gravity turn. The apoapsis is the highest point a rocket reaches. A suborbital trajectory is where you are not going fast enough to reach orbit, and a ballistic trajectory is where you cannot change the path your rocket is going. The size of the universe is something us humans can never truly visualize and comprehend, and there is much left to discover. Space is truly an amazing place. So many incredible things to see, so many places to go, so many discoveries to be made, and so many mysteries that we will have to find answers to ourselves.